Welcome back to Fantasy Hockey Picks and Bets on the Mayo Media Network. It is Wednesday, March 16th, and I'm your host, Cecil Peters, to go over tonight's four-game slate with you. As per usual, before we get started, if you could like the video and subscribe wherever you are listening and or watching, and if you're on YouTube, please leave a comment below with your favorite to-score prop of the night. So after an extremely busy Tuesday in the NHL, we get a much slower schedule for Wednesday. As I mentioned, just 4 games on tap. We got the Boston Bruins in Minnesota, Columbus is in Ottawa, Tampa Bay is in Seattle, and the New Jersey Devils are in Calgary. Boston and New Jersey are both in road back-to-back situations. All the other teams have had 2 days off except for Ottawa, who played a couple nights ago, so they have had 1 night off. All the other teams here have had at least 2 days rest. The first game of the night is in Minnesota. We got the Boston Bruins opening on DraftKings Sportsbook at plus 100. They're in Minnesota to play the Wild. The Wild slight minus 120 home favorites here against the Bruins, who, like I mentioned, are playing on the back-to-back. Started backup goalie Linus Ullmark in Chicago. As I'm recording this, that game hasn't happened. I did end up betting on Boston, so I do hope they manage to grab the victory. I'm not too worried about fatigue with the Bruins. They generally can run their lines pretty evenly if need be. Based on the line that they were against Chicago, it should be a relatively easy victory for them. Like I said, you never know in a hockey game. I'm not sure if that happened, but hopefully they were able to run the lines, kind of roll them, keep everybody fresh for this big game against the Minnesota Wild. Even if they didn't, their top 3 lines are pretty deep. They can basically, in any scenario, they can run their 3 lines as much as they need be. Craig Smith, Charlie Coyle are really performing well on the 3rd line right now. We got Pasternak on the 2nd line, and of course Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron on the 1st line. So regardless of who has to carry the load one night, it seems like on these really strong, deep teams, different players being able to carry the load on different nights really seems to keep them fresh, keep them going. If Craig Smith scores 2 goals one night, David Pasternak takes over the next night. Maybe we get Patrice Bergeron or Brad Marchand the next night. I know minutes-wise it doesn't make sense they're all playing the same amount, but just not having to be the guy every single night is really beneficial for some of those top players. And that's the big advantage the Boston Bruins have here. So they continue to play an extremely sound defensive game. One of the best expected goals teams in the entire league all season long, and that's really based on their strong defensive play. Their opponent, the Minnesota Wild, have really one major flaw right now, and that is goaltending. In their past 9 games, they have allowed at least 4 goals in 7 of them. And they just can't outscore their way around it. They do have some good players. Kevin Fiala, Matthew Boldy's playing really well. Obviously, Kaprizov is their superstar. But when you got a guy like Ryan Hartman as your first-line center, your team just isn't going to be able to outscore teams 5-4 every single night. You saw them outscore the Philadelphia Flyers. You saw them outscore the Detroit Red Wings. But against teams like Boston, you just can't expect to score 5 goals and win the game that way. So it really confuses me that the Wild are favored here. I do expect that Boston should win this game rather easily. So at plus 100, it's an easy call for me to go to the Boston Bruins. Boston's the toughest defensive opponent they're one of the best defensive teams in the league, so they're always going to be a top defensive opponent for any team. But Minnesota hasn't really faced a strong defensive team since back-to-back losses to the Calgary Flames a couple weeks ago. I think this game will go similar to those. Boston's deep, balanced attack should lead them to victory. And like I said, Linus Ullmark started last game, so Jeremy Swayman, who has been their better goalie lately, he gets the start in this game. It all adds up to a Boston Bruins money line bet for me. Next game of the night is in Ottawa. Columbus Blue Jackets plus 100 at the Ottawa Senators. They are minus 120. Ottawa had a tough loss a couple nights ago to Arizona, outshooting and outplaying the Coyotes in a big way, but they gave up a couple breakaways at bad times. Their goalie hadn't played in a month, and he didn't see many shots, but when he did, they were, like I mentioned, there was a couple breakaways, just some really good opportunities. So stat line showed that the goalie played pretty poorly, cost them the victory. In reality, they outplayed Arizona for most of the game. They actually dominated the shot clock. They had almost 40 shots, played way better. They just gave up a couple bad goals at bad times, and you can't even really blame a cold goalie for giving up a couple breakaway goals. What really stood out to me for Ottawa was just how they dominated with their first and second lines, especially the Josh Norris, Brady Tkachuk, Connor Brown first line. I think they had a Corsi advantage of like 23-2 or something absurd. They just dominated the whole entire night, managed scoring on the power play a couple times. I think this game is going to go pretty similar. Columbus profiles like Arizona in a way that they give up a ton of shots. They're not going to suppress that many. So Ottawa's looking at another 35-40 shot night. Columbus does have a bit more offensive punch. so they should be able to get a few more shots on the Ottawa goaltending, which is actually probably a good thing to allow them to get into the game a little bit. But what you're going to see is basically a similar game to the Ottawa-Arizona game. There's going to be a lot of shots for the Ottawa Senators. They're going to score a few goals. It's just a matter of if they can limit the damage the other way to 3 or 4 goals against. And I don't know that they can do that. It's too early to place a bet on this game for me just because there are so many unknowns with the Columbus Blue Jackets side of things. Boone Jenner, Jacob Voracek, both of them missed the last game. I'm not sure if they're going to be ready for this one. Patrick Laine did play last game, but he was day-to-day, kind of being a game-time decision at every game right now, it seems. So these injuries led to bumps for Jack Roslovic and Cole Sillinger. Sillinger actually had a hat-trick in the last game against Vegas. I do like how both of these teams are playing. They're kind of similar. Bunch of offense, not a ton of defense. Goaltending's kind of hit and miss, so I don't know if I'm going to have a bet on this game, and it has 0 playoff implications unless Columbus can go on some kind of a massive run to get back in the playoff mix. But I do think it should be a very exciting game and one that I am intrigued to watch regardless of whether or not I have a bet on it. Plus money on Columbus is probably where I will end up going if they are healthy. Next game's a little easier to figure out. We got the Tampa Bay Lightning minus 290 over the Seattle Kraken. And it's Tampa Bay in this game. They had a bad start to their trip through Western Canada, losing to Winnipeg, losing to Edmonton, losing to Calgary. But they ended up getting a win and a really solid goaltending performance in their last game against Vancouver. That was important because Andrei Vasilevsky had actually had a couple of rare bad games in a row. Kind of started to fall into a little mini slump, but he bounced back. Really solid performance against Vancouver. Tampa Bay kind of rejigged their lines. They put Steven Stamkos with Nikita Kucherov and Alex Killorn on the top line. Anthony Cirelli and Andre Palat played with Braden Point on the second. Both of those lines had the decided advantage pretty much any time they were on the ice, so I expect them to stick together. And against the Seattle Kraken, even worse defense than Vancouver, worse goaltending, I do think they will be able to put up more than 2 goals in this one. I don't have a ton of confidence in Seattle right now. I just don't have much good to say about them at all, so I don't see the Seattle Kraken putting up much of a fight against the Tampa Bay Lightning. The odds, probably too much to bet, but if you did want to dabble on the Tampa Bay Lightning, betting on them to win in regulation is where I would go. The last game of the night is in Calgary. New Jersey Devils plus 265, Calgary minus 340. So after a brutal stretch, 5 games in 7 nights for the Flames, 6 games in 9 nights if you want to extend it that far, Flames finally get on the good side of the NHL schedules. Now they've had a couple days off. They've been sitting at home, and New Jersey played last night in Vancouver and now has to come on the second half of their own back-to-back situation. Calgary actually had a solid 4-2 record over that 6-game stretch, and now they need to take advantage of these breaks that the schedule does give them. According to their record, New Jersey is not much of an opponent. Should be an easy win for Calgary, but when you look deeper into it, even if you just focus on the month of March, New Jersey 3-3, so not an amazing record, not bad, not great. Again, this isn't counting the Vancouver game last night because that hasn't happened as I record this. But the New Jersey Devils, top 5 expected goals for team in the league in March so far. That's kind of how they played all year. They've really generated a ton of chances. They just don't get the goaltending that they need at times. Don't quite have the scoring punch up front. The Flames are probably going to take advantage anyhow. It's just going to take their best game. You got Jacob Markstrom coming in rested. He didn't play the last game of their stretch, but he did have a shutout in his last game. Oliver Shillington missed a couple games. I'm not sure if he's back in for this one, but Mike Stone has filled in just fine on the back end. Forwards continue to dominate, especially Johnny Gaudreau. Him, Elias Lindholm, and Matthew Tkachuk should get a ton of chances in this game. They've been in the offensive zone almost every minute of every game that they've played the last little while. So with Gaudreau feeding them passes, I like Tkachuk and Lindholm to score. I like both of those guys to go over their shot props. But at minus 340, I just can't quite justify a bet on the Flames to win here. So, simple game on the ice. Simple night on the ice. We got Calgary beating New Jersey, hopefully. Tampa Bay over Seattle, hopefully in regulation. Columbus and Ottawa, not quite sure where I stand on that one yet. And the Boston Bruins to beat the Minnesota Wild. Thanks as always for watching. Don't forget to like the video, and please watch again on Thursday and Friday as we have Jake and DJ take you guys through the rest of the week. And I will be back next Tuesday.